بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Welcome everybody for another episode of What's Up Doc. I am your host, Dr. Madiha Saeed, MD. I'm a board certified family physician, best-selling author of multiple books, including The Quranic Prescription, Unlocking the Secrets to Optimal Health, that is available worldwide. And I am a mother of 5. Plus, I have lots of other things I'm doing on the side. But what most importantly, I am super passionate in optimizing over health and wellness through living the Quran and Sunnah. So if you've been following my series, you have noticed we have gone through why people are sick today. What is going on? Why is chronic disease on the rise? Why are we spending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of healthcare every year and still getting sicker and sicker and sicker? Why are our children getting sicker? Why are the autism rates skyrocketing? What is going on with the world today? And so then I would dive into that in a little bit more detail, because the fact that in today's world, we are really, truly, truly suffering. Because unfortunately, the world around us is pushing us in a direction where we are losing our balance. And that balance is what is key to keeping our physical, mental, emotional, psychological, and spiritual health intact. Because subhanAllah, in Surah Baqarah number 143, Allah says, "Thus we have made of you an ummah justly balanced." And over and over and over, Allah has talked about all the ways that He has kept us balanced and how we as Muslims need to be balanced. And subhanAllah, even then Allah shows us in Surah 4, ayah number 79, everything good that happens to you is from Allah, and whatever bad happens to you is from your own actions. Now, thinking about this, what is going on in the world today? Subhanallah, we are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. We are spending more and more money on healthcare. But what the actual issue is that balance. Our balance is off. Because your body is amazing. Your body is one of the life's greatest miracles. And as you're sitting here where there's 3,300 million cells that die every minute, producing 25 million new cells every second, every 10 seconds, they're making million new white blood cells, 20 million new red blood cells, 30 million new platelets. Our heart is beating close to 100,000 times a day without your instructions. We are breathing 22,000 times per day without even thinking about it. When you put food in your mouth, the food that you just had is now making your way down the 30 feet digestive tract, extracting the nutrients. And that food is being digested into nutrients that are fueling your every cell. And that cell is a building block of the human body. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to speak about blood sugar imbalances and how when we put this body, this body that's supposed to be, balanced, how the world around us is putting it out of balance. And we talked the last couple times about why we're getting sick, the cell, chronic inflammation, the mitochondria, how oxidative stress, metabolic dysfunction, and inflammation are leading to destruction and making us sick. And then we talked about tayyib and the importance of tayyib, and then talking about the gut microbiome. And today we're going to talk about the cell and specifically metabolic dysfunction. But before we talked about metabolic dysfunction, let's go and recap about let's talk about what metabolic dysfunction, what metabolic health is. Metabolic health is how we convert food energy to cellular energy. It is everything that our cells need to create that energy, to create that ATP. So let's talk about that cell for a second, right? Let's go back and talk about the importance of that cell. Because when we know that the average human body contains trillions, at least, 37 trillion cells, and each cell is like this town of its own, and the cell is defined, as it's like the smallest unit that's responsible for all of life's processes. And in this unit, it has different parts, right? There's a cytoplasma, there's a cytoskeleton, there's an endoplasmic reticulum, there's a Golgi apparatus. Remember all this from, biology class? But most importantly, there is a mitochondria. And the cell of the job of these cells is to provide structure, support. It converts nutrients from energy, from food that we eat, to energy. It repairs. It replicates a DNA. The cells communicate with each other. They transport things across the cell membranes. They make proteins. Cells, they perform metabolism, the production of energy itself. Growth, as cells continue to multiply and grow tissues and also recycle their own components, which is called autophagy. Basically, cells keep us in balance. And every second, there are trillions and trillions of chemical reactions happening inside our bodies. And guess what? The cells do so much for us. And how do they function? Through ATP. And the cells need food to function. When the body is healthy, everything gets broken down, enters our bloodstream, gets sent to the cell for energy. And each cell has thousands of these powerhouse organelles, right? Organelles that are called the mitochondria. And these mitochondria are a little like, they examine the environment. They see what's going on, right? They ask themselves, am I safe? Are they constantly surveying the area? They're asking if I'm at peacetime metabolism and I'm wartime metabolism. So depending on the kind of cell that the work that they're doing, that determines how many mitochondria are in them. So what they do is these little organelles, they actually take the nutrients from the food that we eat, they break them down, and they create this energy that is used to support everything our body does. And that is where things start to go off, because of the fact that these little organelles need nutrients from our environment. They need key elements, key building blocks to run the chemistry in their organelles components. The mitochondria needs healthy fats, they need nuts, they need wild-caught fish, they need grass-fed beef, they need vitamins as in greens and liver, they need minerals like sea salt, seaweed, bone broth, and if we have these building blocks, the mitochondria has enough energy and the energy that the cell needs to do its job. But what happens if they can't make that energy, right? Your brain gets strained. Your body gets strained. Because think about this. The food that you eat breaks down to glucose. The glucose breaks down in the cell and then is sent to the mitochondria. It generates these electrons, and these electrons produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So basically, without ATP, all of our bodies can turn into a robot that don't move and will fall apart. So our cells need the right environment to function the best that they can. And like, for example, if your lifestyle is out of balance, it then activates or potentially overactivates the immune system. The mitochondria produces energy, and also the direct energy use, and are super important for regulating that immune system. So when it doesn't work, when there's chronic inflammation, there's a dysfunction happening in our cells. They don't function the way that they should. The cells can't signal that they can't replicate. They can't do the job that they need to do to get us healthy. So guess what? We get sick. Our bodies start to fall apart. And I've seen this in my own families. I've seen this in my own self. It is our cells do not have what it needs to thrive. And I don't know why this is not basic biology and why as physicians are not taught this. Because unfortunately, you know what happens is that us physicians are also sick. Us physicians don't even know how to keep ourselves healthy, let alone try to help anybody else. And this is why today's topic and everything that we've discussed in these last couples episodes is so vitally important. Because do you remember how we talked about how like your cells regenerate? There is hope. When our cells regenerate, there's hope to change. We can remove some of those sick cells and build some of those healthy cells. But you need to put your body back into balance. Specifically, why are these diseases on the rise? Why is chronic inflammation on the rise? Because of something called metabolic health that we just talked about, right? Metabolic health is how we convert our food energy to cellular energy. And so that is how we need to build and give our cells exactly what it needs to heal by optimizing our metabolic health. But then you're like, Dr. Madiha, why isn't anybody talking about this? Because guess what? 93% of all of us are metabolically unhealthy. So everybody's dealing with it. Why would anybody want to talk about it? But specifically because of the fact that it is largely associated with the foods that we eat and the stresses in our environment and the lack of sleep that we have and the fact that we're sitting indoors. There's no temperature change. Metabolism is our life force. And that is what we need to understand that when we start to put our bodies back into balance, when we eat food specifically that can help nourish our cells, that is when we have optimal health. So let's go in and talk about that specifically, right? So to summarize, we have trillions of cells, like 40 trillion cells. These cells do so much for us. Specifically, they help us create energy. And how does it help us create energy? By converting the food that we eat and converts it to ATP. So we need to give the cell the appropriate environment in order to do that. So what is going on in the world today? Right? What is going on in the world today is that we're living out of balance lives. Let's first talk about what happens when we start to eat the way that we should be eating, right? Because subhanAllah, Allah has told us, and remember, food is really confusing. Food is super confusing. But this is where we have to go back to the two instruction manuals that Allah has given, the Quran and the Sunnah. Because Allah has told us how we need to eat. Allah has told us how we need to drink. Allah has told us how we need to sleep and pray and treat others and even how to use the bathroom and even handle inheritance. Allah has told us how to live our lives for true success. And Allah knows that the social norms will continue to change. And that's where, everything says, it's really confusing. This is why we have to adhere to the baseline that Allah has given us. Just with everything else, we need to focus on the pieces that are going to add to our lives and ignore the stuff that really will hurt our lives. And so Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that we must focus on food and eat one-third, 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 only to keep your back straight, right? And so we don't have to eat a lot of food. We only have to eat a little bit of food. And then on top of that, we need to eat real food, tayyib food. And we talked about in the last episode, so check that out, how tayyib food, pure food, keeps your gut healthy. Subhanallah. And tayyib food will also help to optimize your overall health and well-being. This is literally tayyib food is how we are, our brains and our bodies. This pure food, this contains biological instructions that promotes health. It lowers inflammation. It balances our hormones. It optimizes our brain function. It improves your gut microbiome and even optimizes your genetic expression. Pure tayyib food removes interference within your body, and it's able to send like signals to your gene expression to turn on and off in the right way. Real tayyib food can reverse climate change. It can build our soils. It can and increases the nutrients that we get from our foods. Biodiversity. It restores the ecosystem and protects the planet. These pure foods contain 25,000 or more phytochemicals, right? And subhanAllah, and this is where these foods influence 37 billions and billions of chemical reactions that occur in your body every second. That is what is key. That this food that we are consuming is not just food that we're consuming. It will become part of your biology. It will dictate how your brain works. It will dictate how your cells work. It will dictate your neurotransmitters. It will dictate your children's bodies and their brains and their genetics. We have to stop thinking of food as just food. We're just having fun. We're just going to be eating it. No, this food is the most critical piece of how we need to keep ourselves healthy. It is the most powerful tool that we have to transform our lives, to transform our physical, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual health. Right? And subhanAllah. And we talked about the gut microbiome, but specifically, let's also now talk about how the microbiome, yes, but then did you know that these cells need, again, we just talked about, needed appropriate balance, right? They need a good environment. So the quality of food and the quantity of food is also important in the Quran. And in the Sunnah, where Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, a believer eats with one intestine, is satisfied with a little bit food, while a non-believer, a disbeliever, eats with 7 intestine, eats way too much. So what are we doing eating all of this food excess, and why is it so bad? Subhanallah. It's because of according to Quran and now science, small quantity matters. And the quality of the food matters. Right? And so what happens to the food that we eat? Okay, let's talk about this really quickly. The food that we eat goes into our bodies, gets converted into glucose. And in order for glucose to enter the cell that it needs for energy, right? The glucose can't enter the cell until it has a key. And that key is called insulin. And the insulin is released from the pancreas and is responsible for controlling blood sugar levels, and it determines our metabolism. So glucose can only enter the cell of organs like the heart, fat, muscles, if it has the key insulin. And once a key comes, this key can open the cell and lets the glucose in. So insulin can also affect every cell of the body and every tissue. It determines life of the cell. Insulin is an anabolic hormone, meaning that it can make bigger things out of smaller things. And insulin's effect is in determining on what cell insulin binds to. So insulin regulates productions of other hormones. It makes fat in the liver. It helps the muscle cell make new protein. It regulates how the cell uses energy and hundreds of other tasks in the body. So over time, the flood, and it could be lots of things. It could be the flood of these inflammatory signals. It can be elevated blood sugar levels from the foods that we're constantly consuming. Because did you guys know that cornflakes raises your blood sugar level higher than a Snickers bar will? So don't go and eat Snickers. But what I'm trying to say is the more processed the food is, the higher it's going to raise your blood sugar. Yes, even wheat bread. Wheat bread, when they turn that into flour, it just turns into sugar. So same with, any of these processed foods. And so when your body is constantly bombarded with elevated blood sugar, let's say it's stressed and that leads to high cortisol, that leads to elevated blood sugar. All of this leads to chronic inflammation. These inflammatory signals starts to wear the key down. And because it keeps on using this key over and over and over, the body stops listening to the insulin. And until the keys stop working, the cells don't open their doors to insulin. It's unable to absorb this glucose adequately. That then leads to a state called insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction or prediabetes. And remember, 93% of us, all of us, are metabolically unstable. That is crazy. So we need to understand this. And this is where it's so important. To keep everything in balance, your glucose has to be in healthy range. The pancreatic beta cells start producing even more insulin, right? And then what happens over time, the beta cells can't keep up with the body's increased demand for insulin. And that then leads to excess glucose in the bloodstream because the fact that the cells are not listening to the insulin, and that then disrupts a less delicate balance. That is a state that becomes very dangerous for the body. The body becomes very uncomfortable with it. Insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction is the root of chronic inflammation and is a root of all of these chronic health conditions that we are dealing with. So the symptoms can actually start long before you actually have, before it's full-blown diabetes. So symptoms of insulin resistance are fatigue, irritability, brain fog, memory issues, concentration issues, weight gain around the midsection, sugar crashes, carb cravings. It's ridiculous. Irritability, right? Who doesn't have that? Weight gain around the midsection, sugar crashes in the middle of the day. And after these meals, you just start to feel sluggish. Remember those every time you eat like this big paratha, then you're like, I need to take a nap. Yeah, that's insulin resistance. That's your blood sugar going out of whack. That's not good. That's your body telling you something is out of balance. And then one can easily become addicted to these carbohydrates. They can have these hypoglycemic attacks, acne, irregular periods, skin folds, like skin around the folds or the creases they become thick and dark, like acanthosis nigricans, infertility, cysts, PCOS, poor sex drive, increased hair growth. Obesity is strongly connected to insulin resistance. So it is really scary how many symptoms people are dealing with today and are actually related to insulin resistance. And there's simple things that we can do to check it, right? There's simple things that we can do to check it. But this is another huge problem, because let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. Because we talked about the symptoms, but what else does it do, right? And this then, insulin resistance actually leads to inflammation. It's an integral part of something that, we need to address for healing and prevention of chronic disease, because anything that causes insulin resistance causes inflammation, and vice versa. So insulin resistance results in this rapid and premature aging, along with diseases like metabolic syndrome, premature aging, inflammation, leading to heart disease, strokes, dementia, autoimmune diseases, and even cancer. Insulin resistance affects most systems. And it even leads to this excess aldosterone. It causes water and salt retention, problems with dyslipidemia and leading to hypertension. It increases blood pressure. It increases the chances of blood vessel damage. It increases, infiltrates the blood vessels with the macrophages, and that then increases the contributes to atherosclerotic plaques. Insulin resistance in men and women are more likely to be infertile. So polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, is associated with insulin resistance, and it's the most common cause of female infertility, including around 10 million women worldwide that are dealing with this, and they don't even know. They're going through like these fertility treatments, they're getting, all these drugs, and people don't realize that they can really just change their lifestyle to change that, right? They're usually responding very poorly to these drugs, and then they typically need more dosages to really make the difference, and then they have increasing side effects. And did you know that if you have better blood insulin levels, the better the response to even clomiphene is? And men with higher body count have usually less testosterone, and then that will then result in like failure to produce healthy sperms. Insulin resistance is actually a huge issue in pregnancy because metabolic health and the metabolic health of the baby and the mother are interconnected. If the mother has stronger insulin resistance, it can actually affect the infant's weight. And actually, they say that there's an increase if the mother is metabolically unstable. There's 40% increase likelihood that the child would also have metabolic dysfunction and be obese in their teenage years. And then it also affects your milk supply. Insulin resistance pushes cancer to grow faster. It can double the likelihood of dying from cancer. Breast, prostate, colorectal cancer have a strong correlation with insulin resistance. Insulin resistance affects skin. It leads to acanthosis nigricans, as we talked about, skin tags, psoriasis. It leads to fat loss. It's associated with, reduced bone mass, osteoarthritis, fibromyalgia, gout, gastrointestinal issues, and even asthma. But unfortunately, sadly, this is so overlooked in today's world. Doctors don't even know it. I was never taught insulin resistance in residency. This is all research I have had to do afterwards. I mean, literally, and it's correlated. If an adult has insulin resistance, they're more likely to have a child with insulin resistance. So this is a problem that can actually cause continued multiple generations. And those insulin resistant children are more likely to have problems with their puberty, right? So there's so many things, and we're going to talk about that after this brief break about what we can do about it and how you can have insulin resistance and what we can do to help decrease it. So we'll be right back for that. So welcome back. We talked about right before you guys left, and we were on break. We talked about the horrors of how we were all getting sick. It really comes down to our cell. It comes down to metabolic dysfunction, oxidative stress, and inflammation. And what is metabolic health? It's food energy converted to cell energy, or energy that basically everything runs on, that determines our life. And it is our imbalanced immune system and imbalanced lifestyles that have actually put our cells out of balance, leading to metabolic dysfunction. Specifically, we talked about our diet. And that is another key piece. Yes, we are eating so much artificial fake food. Diets now are full of fake food that are raising insulin that more than ever before. Cereals made with corn and raise your blood sugar even more than sugar. There's a lack of fiber in these processed foods that leads to increased visceral fat, artificial sweeteners, and has been linked to weight gain and diabetes. The sugary drinks, have you ever seen how much sugar and junk is in these drinks? I mean, I think like Dunkin' Donuts had this one drink with like 187 grams of sugar, and we're drinking it without thinking about it. We're passing out candy to our children on a daily basis. We're in the masjid, we're eating sugar upon sugar upon sugar. destroying the bodies that Allah has given us, destroying the cell, down to the cell, we're destroying. And not even just that, the stress that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Then the stresses in our homes when we turn on the television, the stresses of negativity, the stresses that, our mother-in-law is constantly thinking that we're doing all these things negative, and then the people are people are at work are finding faults, our in-laws are finding faults, our husbands our wives are finding faults, our children are finding faults. Everybody is just attacking all the things that we are doing wrong and ignoring the positivity in our lives. So we are being constantly bombarded by negativity. That also causes inflammation. That increases cortisol. That increases insulin levels. That worsens insulin resistance. That constant negativity and stress. Leaky gut or dysbiosis that we talked about last time, which is basically your gut bugs out of balance. That leads to worsening obesity and belly weight. Toxins in our environment are now making our cells numb to insulin, like air pollution, smoking, cigarette smoke, BPA exposure, pesticides, and even MSG that is located in everything. Sleep deprivation. We are sleeping 2 hours less than we've ever slept, right? Sleep deprivation, a sedentary lifestyle, stress can actually influence our hormones, can alter our insulin sensitivity. After 1 week of just being sedentary, it can increase our insulin resistance 7-fold. Even thyroid hormone. Having less thyroid hormone is associated with reduced insulin sensitivity. Deficiencies in our food due to our lifestyles, because we're not eating enough real food, and there's nutrient depletion in our soils, can actually lead to vitamin D deficiency and magnesium deficiency that can also lead to insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction. Insulin sensitivity reduces with age. As you get older, you become a little bit more insulin resistant. But the medications like steroids, hydrochlorothiazide, which is actually a first-line medication for blood pressure, which drives me crazy, can actually lead to elevated blood sugar, leading to insulin resistance and leading to elevated blood pressure that keeps you on the medication forever. This is why if you're on hydrochlorothiazide, please ask your doctor to find you a different, better option, because that should not be first line. To always check all side effects with your doctor and ask them to see if there's a better alternative. So that is insulin resistance. There's also another hormone that because we're eating processed foods, it actually leads to insulin resistance, and we're overeating these foods because of a hormone called leptin. Leptin is a hormone of hunger that's produced by our fat cells that tells us that when we are satiated and to stop eating. It is the gatekeeper of this fat metabolism that monitors how much energy an organism can take in, right? So when your stomach starts to fill up, the fat cells release leptin to tell your cells that you know what, I've had enough to eat. Tell your cells in your brain that you've had enough. So when your body is constantly overloaded, it overwhelms the system. Because of this constant surges of leptin, like insulin, can also start to turn off and become leptin resistance. And we stop listening to these signals. So just like with all these other hormonal issues, leptin resistance is a really complex issue. So you're not going to go too much into it. But now with too much leptin, the body doesn't respond to it. It leads to overeating, weight gain, and obesity. And the more artificial fake foods that we are eating, it leads to leptin and insulin resistance, and that becomes quicker. That leads to continuing to overeat. As a result, the body doesn't know when you are 1/3 full. I mean, if Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says to eat 1/3, why can't we? We're praying 5 times a day. We're doing all the other things that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us to do. But when it comes to food, we are totally deaf, dumb, and blind, right? We don't know what we're talking about. So deaf, mute, and blind. But we don't know when we're 1/3 full. That is when we need to start thinking about this, because the fact that this lack of sleep, the high stress in our environment, the high fructose corn syrup, the high insulin levels, the overeating, The studies all show that the majority of this overweight and difficulty losing weight is due to leptin resistance. And that leads to excess fat. So what is the solution, and how do we know that we're insulin resistant? Dr. Madiha, you're probably asking that, Dr. Madiha. You scared us. Thank you very much. So how do we know we're insulin resistant or leptin resistant? Or two, what can we do about it? And one, what do we know? How do we know? So there are the easiest way that you can figure this out, the simplest, the best way to determine if you're insulin resistant is to measure your waist to hip ratio. Measure the largest part of your belly and the largest part of your hips. Divide the waist number by the hip number. So again, divide the waist number by the hip number. And ideally, it should be below 0.9 for women and below 0.8 for men. So that's one of the pieces. But the other thing that we can easily do is we can do blood work. I do this in my clinic all the time. Why do we have to wait till the patient is diabetic until we tell them to change their diet? And this is where I just don't understand about the metabolic, the system, right, of medicine, is because of the fact that we just give medicine. We really don't focus on the underlying root cause. And conventional medicine, remember, is really great for when it comes to acute care, but when it comes to chronic care, it completely misses the boat. And remember, as a physician, I get paid for how many patients I see, not how many patients I heal. So why would I want to help heal you? This is why I want to help educate and empower you. That there are simple things that you can do today to go and ask your doctor for a lab slip. Ask them for a fasting insulin. Ask them for your fasting blood sugar. Ask them for a fasting cholesterol panel. Right? HSCRP, homocysteine level. These will check chronic inflammation. These will check inflammation. Check for magnesium deficiencies. Check for vitamin D deficiency. Check for B vitamin deficiencies. The thyroid abnormalities. See if you have any autoimmune conditions with TPO antibodies and antithyroglobulin antibodies to see if you have Hashimoto's. Why don't you check ANA to see if you have other autoimmune conditions? These are simple things you can check. Anybody can check to see if they are insulin resistant. And so we want your insulin level less than 8, right? Preferably even lower. But now there's a difference between normal and there's a difference between optimal. Optimal is what we want your body to function. That's where your body functions best at. Normal is there's like a huge range. So I need your blood sugar less than 90. Other people say 85, but less than 90 for sure. Fasting. I want your triglycerides less than 70. I want your hemoglobin A1C, check hemoglobin A1C. I want your hemoglobin A1C that checks the sugar levels over the past 3 months. I want that less than 5.4. I want your insulin level less than 8. Your homocysteine level less than 13. I want your vitamin D higher than 50 to 70. These are simple things that we do to make sure to optimize our metabolic health. Right? And subhanAllah, living a balanced lifestyle according to Quran and Sunnah, because that is what is key. The Quranic prophetic lifestyle is ideal for us. According to Quran and Sunnah, people, it is super important, right? Because these believers are gifted. We are gifted with this divine knowledge. And this is where the prophetic Quranic diet or plant-rich diet foods, rich in polyphenols, rich in phytonutrients, good fats, fiber, low glycemic foods, rich in nutrients. We are going to focus on those because that is how you really optimize your overall health and well-being. You balance hormones, you regulate your blood sugar level, you keep your gut healthy, you will lower inflammation, you optimize metabolic health, and you optimize overall health and healing. So in the next couple episodes, we're going to talk about what foods to avoid and what foods to eat. We're going to take a deep dive, and I hope you guys join me next time. Thank you guys. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.